Good morning and welcome to the AutoTalk weekly wrap. Got it named it live wrong on the thing today. Oh well. Episode 110 Express Edition. Now I probably named it wrong because I am tired. It is 5 in the morning here in Ningbo, China, where I am on a trip with Zika, who, as we have reported before, are coming to New Zealand when they finally decide who's distributing them. They are, I gather, still literally in negotiations. Uh, Interesting trip. Interesting trip. I was here a year ago, and I've got a different side of the industry now. Some of the cars we've been looking at are crazy, crazy good. The Zika brand itself has been quite the eye opener. The cars are just really premium quality and almost beyond. I think in some ways, some of the things they're putting into them are just brilliant. It seems like they have an idea here and they make it happen. Things like people have kids in the back, so why don't we put a camera in the back that you can watch the kids on, or fold out tables with tablets built in behind them that charge off the car, so you don't have an iPad that always gets flat and the kid drops it at the door when you get to your destination. Um, uh, and at the same time, we got to go on the track, and they were cars that genuinely handled and were fun to drive. So, yeah, it's interesting. I am having a bit of a squabble with the Australians. There's an element of the Australian group who have this belief that everything Chinese needs to be under $60,000 to sell, and I'm sitting there trying to point out that, hey, wait on, that car's basically the same as a Polestar SUV, but a bit better, and that retails for 120 grand. How is it going to be 60? Or for that matter, this is stuff that's over 60. So I think New Zealand's done a better job of accepting and understanding that the Chinese stuff can be good or premium than perhaps the Australians have. It's a fair judgment.
I think you're right, Richard, and it comes down to the notion of you get what you pay for. So if you're buying cheap Chinese, they fill the vehicle
And they do
with
that well
cheaper
too.
parts and cheaper materials, and they do it well. But there has been a history of their steel production and steel runs being of poorer quality, but we're past that. And what Chinese manufacturers are now saying, you want quality? We can build quality, but you're going to have to pay the price for quality because quality
Yes.
requires extra manufacturing costs. So I'm not surprised to see that they're building good vehicles. But the price will have to be higher than what people have expected. But I do expect the price to be more competitive
Yes. Yeah.
than the Japanese and European counterparts. So
Yeah.
it's a very interesting time.
We were driving a luxury SUV with the softest leather I've ever felt in a car this side of a Bentley. 475 kilowatts of power, a 100 kilowatt battery, range north of 500 to 600 kilometers, and people suggesting that should be trying to compete with the Model Y. No, it's I don't
Mm.
see Model Y necessarily as that particularly premium these days, and I think I think Zika would be doing themselves a disservice to go too low. Now they have been pushing the numbers as to how low they on value. So they're putting out their they've already launched their big flash people mover in Australia. This thing is 7 seats of absolute luxury, big range. It's basically Volvo sells a version of the same vehicle, and Volvo's gone up market, and they put that in at a price I think between 120 and 130 Australian, which shows what the brand can do. So we'll see. Be interesting to see where it lands in New Zealand. My expectation is we'll see it go to the Giltrap group alongside Geely and Polestar. Of course, they're all part of the same group. Zeekr is actually the homeroom for the platform that is under the Polestars and under or likely some future Volvo product or some current Volvo product for that matter. So yeah, be interesting to see what comes from that. But it's interesting the Chinese car companies this is my second trip up here this year. Compared to, I guess we'll say, Western car companies or even the more traditional Japanese car companies, when you go to an event with those brands, they are very much there to show you what they've got. It feels when you come up here with the Chinese brands, it's more of a, here's what we've got, what can we do to improve it, what do you think we should price it at, and where should we put it in the market? And I genuinely feel like they're listening. It's an interesting thing. They're clearly willing to take on, or at least act like they're taking on, input from New Zealand, Australia. We're early in the right hand and early in the Western world markets for them. They really want to listen to us. So it's interesting. Yeah, haven't seen that.
That's legacy car making versus new entrants, I suppose.
Yeah.
And good morning, Richard. I was just thinking for a second there what you were talking about. New Zealand is probably about 5 or so years ahead of the Australian market when it comes to acceptance of EV product, or at least the penetration of EV product into our marketplace. We're about 5 years ahead. And forget the whole, clean car thing and what happened and what's currently happening in the marketplace. The general public acceptance of these brands and of EVs in general, well, I think we're about 5 years ahead. And so the Australian perception of what first of all, an EV should cost, but particularly a Chinese vehicle would cost, they are literally thinking 3 or 4 years behind a New Zealand consumer. And so what you're talking about there, the Australian journalists, perhaps they are now truly exhibiting a bit of a dinosaur mentality to the market that they should be rethinking, perhaps.
Yeah. I also think that I don't think it's necessarily that, but I think there is this mentality with Australia that everything has to sell volume. And I was chatting with the marketing manager, Andrew Harissa here, for Zika, and I think he's in agreement that you can't. Not every brand can do that. Some brands have to have a margin. He pointed out simply by the fact that some of the a lot of the certain Chinese brands that have bought journalists up to China fly them business class. Sorry, fly them economy, which is a very rare thing in the market to fly a business flight that long. For a work flight that long and fly business class if you're taking someone else. Zika has made a point of flying people up business class. Now that's not because they're trying to buy anyone. That's simply because they want to see themselves competing with the big Western luxury brands, and to them that's what their Western market divisions are telling them that's what people expect. If you want to be a premium brand, you need to offer a premium experience.
My experience, Richard, with the Australian versus New Zealand market for new vehicles is that you're right. Australia do expect to sell on volume. So right across the board for all of the brands that are in New Zealand, the New Zealand market tends to have a smaller model range, and it tends to be medium to higher spec vehicles. Even Kia and Hyundai are the same. You go to Australia, and let's just continue with Kia and Hyundai. My experience was that in Australia, they had models that were cheaper and less spec. And so right across the board, that's the mentality in the Australian market, value for money. And they pride themselves as being probably the biggest range of vehicles per head of population and the best value vehicles per head of population, which is true, but it's because their vehicles tend to be low to medium to high spec. The high spec vehicles in Australia attract a luxury vehicle tax, and so that becomes difficult, and so they always want to see the medium to medium high spec vehicles under a certain price to avoid that tax. But if you're looking at the distrust of the Chinese brand is not just the Australian media, it's the Australian psyche, it's the people in Australia, it's their culture. And I think they're suspicious of China right across the geopolitical spectrum as well. Yeah. And if you think it's hard to sell
a lot more from China than we are.
Yeah. And if you think it's hard to sell a Chinese vehicle into Australia, you tried the Americans. That's another whole league of suspicion about Chinese quality, i.e. total lack of. The Americans in general do not like the Chinese product. It's a legacy issue that China's going to have to deal with because they created that brand perception early on by moving product that was distinctly of poor quality. So they've got some work ahead of them on to become a motor vehicle exporting country. All of the homologation work to go into the other countries, they've got headwinds to fight against. And they're using both New Zealand and Australia as the test markets for that. Which is good. And New Zealand has been, you're right, Graham, ahead of the game. I'm not sure if it's 5 years anymore, but it used to be about 5 years. Australia's starting to catch up because they've got more discounts available and the consumers are starting to look at that. But yeah, I think the luxury Chinese brands are genuinely going to have some difficulty in getting Western markets to accept the product at the price that they need to be able to sell it at. So it's going to be an interesting time.
The key thing I think is basically summing up this is I don't think you can just go cheap. I think they need to perhaps need to go high and just stick to their guns. You can't. It's easy to go. It's easy to go start up and go down. It's very hard to start down and go up. That's something that
Correct.
brands in New
Correct.
Zealand
And I think that they probably need to do what one of the American brands that's reintroducing themselves into the market here, go at a good value price, but still at a luxury market, but expect your volumes to be slightly smaller while you get a foothold and the market accepts the product.
Yes, exactly. So yes, that's Zika. That's the very positive side of the Chinese car industry. Now, we did have an interesting one while we were here, though, timing-wise, in that my colleague we own a website up here called Inside China Auto, with the great journalist Mark Rainsford, English guy who's based up here, and he kindly, rather than having me having to fly through some random airport in the middle of China and take a while to get here, he offered to come and pick me up in Shanghai and bring me to Ningbo. In a press vehicle. Now, this press vehicle was very, very interesting. It was a Jude Robo 07. So again, it's another part of the Geely group, slightly more far flung, and it is on the same platform as some of the Seeker stuff. But it's not one of their core brands. It's a co-project with someone else, I believe. Very interesting car. So. A very high level of autonomy.
A lot of them drive a lot slower than the rest of China. If you drive in Jiangxi, they're all
do lane changes. That little box next to the car is where it could lane change into. Big like that. So very.
I think your VPN's not particularly happy about video, Richard.
No. Did it actually show?
A little bit.
Yeah.
A tiny bit.
But there was inklings through the journalist fair in China that this brand was not long for this world, and that perhaps its time had run. And when I'm not going to say it's going to go bust, because I think it's part of the group. No one's going to go unpaid. It's going to be more a case of that things are going to get orderly wound down, and probably the technology that's got shifted over into other brands. Well, he arrived to drop the vehicle back at the office the next day. And that's the chairman explaining to staff. Things are Yes. We shouldn't be laughing at people losing their jobs. Well, hopefully they'll be absorbed by the Singapore companies. Yes, that's the chairman doing his bit.
That's like one of those Western camera moments.
No, I don't think so. I don't think it's quite as closed as people perhaps think it is here. I mean, heck, it's visa-free now for Kiwis. I just flew through customs this time after a very nice Air New Zealand flight. Thank you, Air New Zealand. So that kind of stuff still exists. There's a lot of talk that like maybe half the brands that are here now will survive. And I think that's probably about right. But when we say survive, a lot of the time it's companies with a dozen brands, and they're just working out what sticks. Work out what brands work and squeeze them together. Even Zeekr itself's just semi-absorbed one of its brothers, Link & Co. So it's we're in that kind of.
And if you think it's going to be rugged that only half of the current lot are going to survive, you go back 7 years when the Chinese government was investing heavily in this sort of sector for internal consumption. The number of companies that exist in China today is a lot smaller than what was initially there. There were a lot of government handouts to get companies started, but rationalisation kicked in at about 3 or 4 years later.
Mm-hmm. But look, overall, really impressive. Definitely a big shift here to their local brands, and there's some cool stuff coming down to New Zealand if you're a lover of technology. I drove 1,000 horsepower car yesterday, and it was good. And I drifted an electric car. I'll get some there'll be some photos and videos of that on EVs and Beyond and autocar.co.nz in the very near future. Right, let's be on our best behaviour and power through this news in less than 10 minutes. Because
Okay, I promise.
have a big day. It's not you I'm worried about, Graham. Now, NZTA seeks feedback on vehicle exhaust emissions rule changes. The New Zealand Transport Agency is consulting on proposed amendments to the Land Transport Rule Vehicle Exhaust Emissions 2007, aiming to keep New Zealand's light vehicle emission standards aligned with Australia. The alignment ensures vehicles can enter the New Zealand market without the need for modifications, reducing complexity for importers and maintaining consistency with international standards. The proposed changes build on amendments introduced in 2023, which incorporated the latest ADR Australian rules for heavy vehicles and Euro 60 standards for light vehicles. We share a new market with Australia, so sharing the same standards makes sense. The new Australian design rules are robust and will help realise benefits like reducing harmful nitrogen oxide emissions from diesel vehicles, says NZTA Infrastructure and Stewardship System Policy Manager Darren Bars. The light emission standard limits outlined in the new ADRs are the same as Euro 60 standards already included in the rule. Smart move, David?
Yes, it is, and it's something that the new vehicle sector argued for a lot under the previous government and largely fell on deaf ears, where they wanted to get ahead of the Australian market, which is just not good when around about 70 to 80% of new vehicles entering the New Zealand market are ADR compatible. So yes, definitely a good move, Richard.
I guess the flip side of that is Australia's not necessarily known for being particularly forward-moving when it comes to air quality regulation.
Yeah, I mean, it's a debatable point. They are progressing, but they did take them a very long time to get into the Euro 6s. But the Euro 6 has this smorgasbord of options: 6A, 6B, 6D, 6E, and it gets more difficult. So it's getting into the which particular harmful emission are you wanting to eliminate or reduce out of the exhaust level. So the biggest argument I think that we ran, and I know the used vehicle sector was interested in this argument as well, is that for the New Zealand government to incentivise electric vehicles, you were going to get a quicker uptake of air quality than you were to get these marginal improvements in vehicle exhaust from the other. If you can do both, it's good. But I think with the rate of introduction of electric vehicles, it buys you a little bit of time to make some sense about how you align your market standards. And so I think this was a really good move. And I don't think it's going to be that detrimental to the New Zealand health system.
Similarly, I think at the moment, Graham, VIA are pushing for some adjustments to the way their emission standards align with the Japanese ones. Have you been looking at that as well?
No more than anybody else has, to be fair, because I know there's some real concerns about what's up and coming for our particular sector in the very near future indeed. And even just looking actually at, gosh, what's happening next year, let alone what's happening to us in 26, 27, 28. I was going to make a little bit of a passing comment, though, in terms of ADRs in general, David, which is the future of ADRs itself is not necessarily a given for Australia in the pathway forward, is it?
Yeah,
there's a lot of chatter in Canberra about the future of ADRs, whether Australia actually requires its own specific standards, given that it too is just a taker of motor vehicles from other jurisdictions. And I know within the work we do in Australia, there is a lot of chatter at an official level about what ADRs actually does in a modern context. Under the current government, perhaps not, but there are certainly murmurings from the opposition about what could be on the menu for a future government from 2025 in Australia in terms of rationalising down and harmonising standards. And that great term harmonisation doesn't necessarily sit with ADRs being a factor.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not as complex as it sounds when I say it was complex, but ADRs made sense while there was manufacturing occurring in Australia. Now that there's no manufacturing, it doesn't. The Australian government was already going down the harmonisation route to link with the Euros. And I know for ANCAP has done the same. And I previously have run the argument, why do we need ANCAP and why do we need ADRs when there's no manufacturing? The answer to the NCAP is that there's slightly different variations in terms of model setup to cater for our roads here in New Zealand and Australia. But in terms of ADR standards, now that Australia has got no or very little manufacturing, it's questionable as to whether they're needed. The hesitation, I think, for some, though, is that the Euro standards are tending to sort of press ahead faster than what the Australian market is there. But for New Zealand, we're very comfortable with this because we just simply have a rule that says either ADR or Euro standards or Japanese standards or North American standards. So you pick your menu of what is acceptable, and then you give the market the flexibility to be able to import to meet those standards. So I think you're right. I don't think Australia needs to keep going with the ADR. It's a very high overhead for the Australian market to keep them updated and develop them all of the time. And it can be adversely restrictive when it doesn't need to be.
Mm-hmm.
Right, moving on. We have a change in a pretty well-known industry brand. Assurant Vehicle Care launch concludes Protector brand. Fortune 500 company Assurant has completed the rebrand of Protector Insurance. The rebrand includes a new portal for New Zealand car dealers and an enhanced customer site for purchasing motor vehicle insurance. It completes Assurant's acquisition of Protector Insurance, announced 2 years ago in December 2022. As we announced, Protector Insurance is now called Assurant. We complete the journey we started 2 years ago. Assurant Global Automotive President Jeff Strickland says. So yeah, that's the end of the Protector brand. And replaced by Insurant. I could have said that the Protector brand's been around a long time. It's been
around a long time.
It's catchy. Yep. It's catchy. We're going to have to start calling it Assurant as well instead. That's a bit of an interesting one. I mean, it's not like Turner's turned Autosure to Turner's Warranties when they bought it. Why can't we have our own brands? No, it'll be fun. It'll be good. It'll be good.
New flags.
Now, speaking of companies that are in a little bit of turmoil from our video earlier on, Nissan restructures senior leadership. So Nissan announced the appointment of a new leadership team effective January 1. Nissan wants to respond quickly to current issues, so it streamlined its management team after appointing a chief performance officer, Julien Cartier, effective December 1. In April 2025, Nissan will further change management to create a lean, flat structure that can respond flexibly and quickly to change in a business environment. Basically they're in trouble, so they're shuffling the deck chairs to try and find a solution. Interestingly, this is an appointment from within the alliance. I'm not sure necessarily that going back to the alliance is always going to be the right thing, and perhaps they should be looking maybe in Japan. I don't know what's gone wrong there.
That's politics at play there, perhaps. I maintain, and it's probably an unpopular opinion if you're watching anyone from Nissan New Zealand, I'm really sorry, but I maintain that Nissan's product line of late has just been, can I say the word lackluster without being sued? I think the issues at Nissan are a lot more than just structural ones at the top. I think Nissan, to an extent, from my opinion, has lost its way to an extent around the changes in the marketplace. I wonder if it has failed to keep up in areas where it needs to maintain the profitable sectors that deliver the money to do the stuff that may not be profitable but have future vision. And I'm talking about the ICE versus EV sectors. Well,
the thing with Nissan is that they owned the EV sector and then they just pretty much stopped.
Yeah.
Put out the founder of the modern EV era and then just didn't really do anything with it for what took them a decade? No. Over a decade to get their second model on the road.
And even the second model. So we now have the Aria on the road, for example, and I haven't driven one, I haven't looked at one, so I'm just speaking here from pure speculation into a sector that is now already crowded out with competitors particularly from China, but from other source markets as well. So it's not like it's a groundbreaking product anymore. And in the rest of their traditional sector, so Nissan, I think, have really interesting but really difficult problems to overcome going forward into the future. And it's interesting that I've already had a couple of people through the dealership here, because we do a bit of Nissan used product, that have seen on social media or their MSN feeds, and they're saying, if I buy this used Nissan, is there going to be parts and servicing for this in a year's time? Because I've heard they're going bust. So we've talked about it on the show. As people in the beltway, as it were, we understand that's probably not going to be the case. There's going to be all these different permutations of a future for Nissan. But for the average person that then shells out the money to buy a car, which, let's face it, they are the most important people, that's what they're hearing.
We need more of them. David, you've got a very short take.
The alliance hasn't been kind to Nissan, and Nissan has been a traditional company management-wise in Japan, and I think they have needed to restructure their senior management team. They need to unwind, in my opinion, some of those arrangements. But the alliance with Renault is just, and the previous CEO is still hurting them. The product has been an interesting dilemma because New Zealand is not a major market for them. They concentrate on America and Europe. So again, it's interesting to see where they're going. Will they go bust? I don't know. With the number of with China on the rise, I'm expecting one or two Japanese manufacturers to really hurt unless they can make some significant change to the way in which they operate.
Hey there, guys.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I lost you for a minute there. So hopefully everyone caught that thing. Right, now moving on. New Ford dealer principals for Avon City Motors and Ruahine Motors. Ford New Zealand has announced the appointment of 2 new dealer principals in its national network of 28 dealerships. The 2 new appointments will take the reins of the 2 stalwart dealer principals retiring at the end of the year, John Luxon of Avon City Motors and David Wills of Ruahine Motors. Those names have been attached to those brands for a very long time. Richard Burns was appointed dealer principal at Avon City, effective January 1, 2025. Burns replaces Luxton. Both have worked closely over the past few months to ensure a seamless transition. He's got an extensive automotive background. He joined Avon City Ford as general manager in July this year. Before that, he was dealer principal for the Colonial Motor Company family in central Otago. Paul Shanks is the new dealer principal and chief executive of Ruahine Motors, effective January 1. He brings a wealth of knowledge and experience and is well regarded in the business community in Waipukurau and the surrounding areas. On behalf of the Ford team, congratulations to the new appointees and a huge thank you to John and David for their years of service and dedication to the Ford brand in New Zealand. Ford New Zealand Managing Director Annalise Atina says, Ford tend to have a very stable and long-running dealers and dealer principals. So remember those names; they'll probably be around for quite some time.
Can I just say that sticking with the Ford brand for a second, it's amazing the difference a good DP makes to the brand or to the location. Good friend of mine has just successfully purchased a new Ranger and I'm going to shout him out here because I think the service they got was exceptional, from North Harbour Ford. Bought a new Ranger and he had nothing but absolutely exceptional service all the way through. And this is on the back of what would be a polar opposite in terms of service that he received from another outlet for the brand in Auckland, and rang me in despair for advice on what to do. And he has been to North Harbour Ford and successfully completed a transaction and said he could not speak more highly of the team all the way through the experience. And I think a bit of a hat tip to the team over there, but also, once again, I say this time and time again, you can be the DP of a major outlet for one of New Zealand's most successful brands. But if your people are not delivering on the ground the service that your customers expect, it is all for nothing. And it's always never a bad time to have a good hard look at what your perception of what your team does versus the reality. When somebody walks in and says, I'd like to buy a new Ranger, please.
Yes, and if that dealer that probably knows who we're talking about is listening, you can do all the fleet business in the world you want. You can process all the government business in the world you want. But one day, the buyer for that fleet or that government department or whatever might walk onto the yard as a private customer and not be that happy about what they experience.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, yes. Right. Now, Ingham Great Lake adds GWM to its brand portfolio. Taupo-based multi-franchise dealership Ingham Great Lake has added the Chinese brand GWM to its portfolio. The new partnership reflects Ingham Great Lakes and GWM's brand's shared determination to deliver automotive.
Read the press release.
Well, I'm out of the office, so I left someone else to do this, and it's By introducing GWM into our portfolio, we are strengthening our ability to offer a broader selection of high-performance alternatives to our customers, Ingham Great Lake dealer principal Hugo Richard says. GWM's growing presence and commitment to producing vehicles of outstanding quality make it an ideal addition to our family of brands. Yeah, that would be 3 utes that they can get from that site. You can get a Nissan Navara for now, an Isuzu D-Max, and a GWM. Actually, 2 utes from GWM. So probably a good score there for an area like that. New chair for the Climate Change Commission. Former Governor General Dame Patsy Riddett has been named the new chair of the Climate Change Commission. Her appointment was announced by Climate Change Minister Simon Watson, will take effect in February 2025. The Commission is an independent Crown entity which provides advice and monitoring to support New Zealand's transition to a low-emissions, climate-resilient future. I'm pleased that Dame Patsy Riddett is joining the Commission. As a former Governor-General, she will come to the role with an extensive and distinguished career in law and governance. So you might be able to answer this, David, but as I understand it, like, the Climate Change Commission doesn't actually set anything as such. It doesn't actually have a stick as such, but it does provide guidance and advice to the government and not necessarily other departments, but their guidance, of course, can be used and maybe used by ministers in target setting. Is that right?
Well, it acts like a Crown entity, so it has staff and officials, and the Commission is like its board. So if you think of maritime safety, which has a board and is a Crown entity, and it can set rules, the Commission doesn't set rules. Its purpose is to provide sound advice and robust analytical advice on what is happening, and a key function are their emission reduction plans going forward, which the government will then use, and those recommendations will fall upon other agencies and other government departments to implement. So it has a fairly significant and fairly powerful role. It's an influencing role, which is not just merely advice, it's advice that needs to be acted on, but it doesn't do the acting itself. Can I just comment on, I'm really pleased to see her appointed as the chair. The previous chair, for me, was a little bit too academic, and I think probably a little bit too, in my opinion, I found him to be a little bit too biased in some of the way in which he acted. Now, he won't like that, but that's a perception that some of us had. I did find, though, that the staff of the Commission, the officials, they, I think, have continued to behave and act in a way that I can only describe as extremely professional. So I think it's a really interesting organisation. It's doing a job that's hard to do. It's politically, emotionally charged. Yeah, good appointment. I think this is an exceptional appointment.
Good. If she was good enough for the Queen, she's good enough for us. Now, Tourism Holdings announces job cuts and a leadership restructure. Tourism Holdings Limited is cutting around 100 manufacturing jobs in Australia and several support roles in the United States as part of a targeted cost reduction plan. The changes, which aim to save $12 million in net profit after tax by financial year 2027, also include a major leadership restructure that will see 2 executive roles combined. The new NZX and ASX listed campervan rental and tourism operator says the job losses in Australia following reduced demand in 2024, the closure of the Melbourne sub-assembly plant and adjustments to 2025 production planning. In the US, the role reductions are expected to save more than $500,000 annually. THL will merge the Chief Financial Officer and Chief People and Transformation Officer roles. The current Chief People and Transformation Officer role, Ollie Farnsworth, has been appointed the new position of Chief Financial and Group Support Officer, effective January 1. That's a very big and powerful New Zealand company. It seems like they've been on a very big growth path overseas in recent years, and perhaps just trimming a little bit of that back in line with, we had a big boom in campervan rentals globally after COVID. Maybe that's slowing down a bit now. I'm assuming from the closure of the Melbourne sub-assembly plant, that means that that's more manufacturing for the New Zealand facilities. They obviously own Action Manufacturing and build a lot of their motorhomes here, although I've noticed they've been bringing in more and more of the slightly, I think, more affordable European factory build options. I don't see those cuts as a bad thing necessarily. There's no announcement of cuts necessarily in New Zealand. just tightening things up globally in line with what's happening.
New Zealand's tourism trajectory is still appears to be moving upwards in terms of a percentage of our revenues.
Right. And All Blacks and New Zealand Rugby in partnership with Ford New Zealand. Ford New Zealand has sponsored the All Blacks and New Zealand Rugby for more than 30 years, have a decision been made to end the partnership in early 2025. Ford New Zealand is disappointed in the outcome, but wants to acknowledge it's been a fantastic experience backing the teams in black over the years. We've deepened our relationship with the athletes and Ford and New Zealand sports fans nationwide. Runs through to January 31. They're still with New Zealand Cricket, New Zealand Hockey, New Zealand Football, and the Football Ferns. Interestingly, they'll have set the headlines because pretty much every member of the All Black squad and the coaching squad and all the Super Rugby coaches get a nice Ford to drive, and those vehicles have been requested back. If you read between the lines in the story, it sounds like Ford was happy to continue, but perhaps the New Zealand Rugby Football Union, as we have heard them do with other negotiations they've had, wanted perhaps a little more money than Ford was willing to spend.
Interesting that there has been and this is not confidential information, it's just an observation, there was a swag of black Rangers that I was told had come from the All Blacks and other squads turning up at a certain South Auckland auction house, turning up about 5 or 6 weeks ago, maybe 7 weeks ago. There was a whole yard full of them coming through Black Little Rangers that I was told were part of a sponsorship program that was ending, and I was told it was the All Blacks. So I wonder if it was possibly signalled a bit earlier than our news item today.
Yes. So it's an interesting one there that either brand will let that go, because that's been, that deal's been, I feel like it's been in place my entire life. It's always just felt like All Blacks drive forwards. I'm not sure who's going to pick it up because it's a big, expensive contract. Perhaps there was some brinksmanship, and maybe there won't be a drive sponsor for a while. We'll see how we go with that. So yes. Now LDV gunning for light commercial buyers. Well, they've got an expansion of their range, so they have now the Deliver 7. Interestingly, a vehicle that was launched nearly a year ago in Australia as EV only. We're getting it now with turbo diesel or fully electric, I believe. And they've also gone updated their Deliver 9 and the model year 2024 T60 Max. So yeah, another few commercials there. The Deliver 7 starts at $53,990, very much gunning for the high ace. Probably one of the vans that's closer in size and dimensions to a high ace. And pretty good specs on that, including a 9-speed ZF gearbox. Lots of spec. And then the T60 Max mostly seems an interior upgrade. So yeah, a couple of new cars there. AMI Motor Hub expands into Warren Fitness and vehicle servicing. So IAG New Zealand's vehicle repair AMI Motor Hub has expanded its services at the Hobsonville site to include Warren Fitness and vehicle servicing for all customers, not just those doing repairs through their own insurance. Service is a strong part of our industry's profit source, and others, we're seeing inklings are wanting more and more into that. So watch out, you might be competing with your local insurance company for your service business in the very near future.
I thought that was an interesting story, actually. I think, and David, you probably nod your head too, because it affects both new and used. I think there's real change on the horizon to how Kiwis' ability to service and maintain their motor vehicles. We see traditional outlets like insurance companies, who knew? And we saw it with the purchase of their own panel beating outfits, with the purchase of their own assessing yards, moving into these next steps to bring it all in-house and exclude the external independence, if you like, within the trade. It's interesting moves.
Yeah, I'm not so sure the vertical integration in the long run is going to be a good thing. Competition is always helpful. So I'm a little bit concerned about the direction some of this is taking. But at the moment, it seems to be adding value to customers. So we're at the front end of it.
Yeah. And now our last story for the day, and one you might have an opinion on, Graham. The last Ram 1500 V8 rolls off the production line. The final
I'm
Ram
weeping tears.
pickup powered by the Hemi V8 has roared off the Australian production line ahead of a turbocharged 6-cylinder petrol unit arriving next year. Limited numbers of the V8 remain in Kiwi showrooms before the updated model arrives in the first half of 2025. The final Ram 1500 Limited, finished in granite crystal paint, is the 28,495th Hemi V8 from the previous DS series and current DT series, to be remanufactured from left-hand drive to right-hand drive by Ram Trucks Australia and New Zealand. That's a lot more than I thought. That's a lot of converted vehicles.
That's a lot of converted trucks. Yeah.
Yes. So,
Sad day.
well, here I've got a thing for you, Graham. So
Yeah, it's got a Hemi.
So you wander into your local pub in Western Sydney, sit down at the bar, put your keys in your wallet on the bench, and the guy goes, "Oh, so you've got a Ram, the V8?" And they go, "No, it's a straight six, big. It's like the big ones. It's a straight six turbo." And the guy goes, "Oh, so it's the 2500?" No, it's a 1500. It's the straight six turbo. Are you sure it's not a 2500 with the Cummins? No, it's a straight six turbo. I mean, it's not the first straight six turbo Ram. It's just normally they're a nice big giant Cummins diesel.
I don't know who you talk to in Australian pubs, Richard. Not the same people that I appear to talk to in Australia, that's for sure. But
I, for one, welcome the move. I think the new motor is going to be great.
David. I love a Hemi. I'm a Mopar guy. I've always had a particular fascination with all things Mopar, and it's always been seen as sort of the third wheel in the American, triumvirate of brands, so to speak. But the Hemi was one of those mountain motors that was recorded into urban legend. And so the answer to your question, Rich, is you toss the keys on the bar top amidst all the pools and puddles of spilt Fosters, and it says, "Oh, you got a Ram, mate?" Says, "Yeah, it's got a Hemi." It just doesn't sound the same as like, "Yes, it's got an inline 6-cylinder with a turbocharger, and it makes a fairly good horsepower as well." It just doesn't sound the same. I've had a Ram. Disclaimer for all watching the show: I've had a Dodge Ram. It was built out of melted down rail wagons and scrap steel lying on the floor, and I just didn't care. I knew how badly built it was. I just didn't care. And I was probably the target market for the vehicle. I hold my hands up and say, yes, I probably was, but we're still buying motor vehicles, and grumpy old buggers like me still appreciate the history that goes in behind them. So I'm sorry, I'm going to weep tears.
I've never owned a V8 vehicle in my life.
David.
Lots of turbos. Lots of turbos.
And I have too. This is the thing. I've owned plenty of high-performance Japanese turbocharged vehicles. Never owned a really high-performance European vehicle. I've played with quite a few. And I sit firmly with a foot in both camps. I don't subscribe to the whole Jap crap versus, American Munter type thing. I appreciate, I'm sorry, Richard, I appreciate lots of gasoline being forced into chambers and being compressed as fast as it possibly can and being turned into...
I appreciate it too. Noise. I'm just not willing to pay for it.
Noise, and then horsepower, but first of all noise, and then the horsepower comes second.
Yes. It's the payment that gets me.
And on that, Tim the Toolman, I note, there hasn't he been cancelled? I'm not sure. Thanks everyone for joining us. I'm going to head off now and pack before we move from Ningbo to Hangzhou and then back home to New Zealand to Morrow. I'm literally missing my daughter's kindy graduation to be here. Anyway, we'll catch everyone next week for, I guess, maybe the last AutoTalk weekly wrap of the year.
Well, I don't think it's been done. Bugger all on the Friday, so yes, it will be. So bring the cake and the tinsel.
Yes. Everyone, catch you later.
All right, everyone.